Guys, this is video 2 on presentation basics. It's going to cover the body and the conclusion. And one of the things that came across in a handful of minutes in between these two videos creations that I thought about was the importance of explaining why speech structure is so important, why it's not just random thoughts or things like that. And the answer to that is being able to take your audience down the specific path that you had planned. And I think the importance of structure is to be able to, and this word has a bad connotation, being able to manipulate your audience numbers. But I mean that in a way of like moving them in the right direction, not in an evil way. And to manipulate your audience to thinking along the same path that you are, being able to be that guide to see things in the way that you see them. Because the only way that you have to move that message is your speech. So let's go through the awkward part of the video where I do the screen share and mess this up. So I'm over here. This is still the presentation basics slide. I'm going to present it, and the first video in this series talked about the primacy recency effect and introductions. So we're going to move towards the concept of transitions. The reason why we utilize transitions within the body of our presentation is to help the flow along. Now, I've given some kind of broad, though that being said, effective ways to transition from one point to the next. Now that I've told you about the importance of showering, I can now tell you how to shower. That was a terrible example. I need to write more of these things down. Now that I've told you about the roster of the 1987 Minnesota Twins, I can now tell you about their win in the World Series, something along those lines. The key is to be able to show how these things are connected so that the audience's brain starts to say, okay, even though I'm moving from one area to the next, I understand how those things are connected. And in many ways, the transitions, the glue or the mortar in between the bricks of the speech, the bricks being our data, our information, our stories, things like that. Being able to have that mortar together allows everything to make sense. Now, the conclusion goes back to that primacy recency effect that we talked about in regards to the introduction. Because if you'll remember, the introduction was the primary, the first part of it. The recency is the last part of the speech. And so it's the final impression that you are going to leave your audience, and it needs to do three different things. In many ways, it mirrors the introduction phases that we talked about in the earlier video. We review the main points and we restate the thesis. For the sake of these speeches, you can do each of these things word for word, just in the past tense. So if you said, today we are going to talk about the US Department of Defense, you would then in the end say, so today we did talk about the US Department of Defense, literally, because you've already done it. We then want to have some form of reference back to that attention getter, the goal being a circle type of a presentation. We want to wrap all of these things up. So if our introduction story was about a tiger, we want to bring it back to that same tiger. It's going to wrap it up in a nice little package. The last thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that our last individual sentence or our last handful of words are making it very clear to the audience, essentially like it would be a clap line. Like, I know that when we are wrapping up this particular sentence, it is going to be time for me to clap for my speaker. Finishing with like, I'm done, or we're good, or that's it, or anything along those lines is really leaving your audience with a, oh, I don't actually think they had anything to say, as opposed to something that was really strong or really powerful. And even though this video isn't going to do an awful lot with delivery, that's for other videos, it is in our delivery that if our goal is to say, like, I know this is the final line of the presentation and I want the audience to know, there are ways to do that with our delivery that's going to make that clear as well. And so when we look at the transitions and the conclusion, you can see that when we put them all together with the introduction, that the structure aspect of this is of vital importance. Being able to understand this structure is the first step in being able to not only say, okay, I understand what is expected of me, but also, like, when you can mess around with it for a little bit. Like, it is one thing to not have a structure for no reason. Essentially, it's the difference between me not having my tie tied because I'm doing it for effect versus, oh, the tie isn't tied properly because he doesn't know how to tie a tie, or because this button wouldn't fit, as opposed to, like, oh, that was done on purpose. So we show that we can understand structure, so then if we choose to change part of it, we're doing it in a way under which it's like, I understand what's expected of me, and it is my choice to maneuver a little bit of it away. Have a fantastic day. Now it's the awkward part where I just kind of finish it off. You can see the importance of the conclusion here, because right now I'm just stalling a little bit. It seems like I'm dying out, but it's not, because you know what? I'm awesome.